Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Ben Kinsley has joined us this evening, co-host and co-producer. And you are also, what is the name of your company?
Imperium Advisors.
Imperium Advisors.
Yeah.
Imperium Advisors.
Correct.
You should start mentioning that.
Since Put a banner up
exactly,
back here
since
somewhere.
you're also a sponsor of sorts, so that's it. And our guest tonight is Scott McLaughlin, who is Executive Director of the Vermont Granite Museum and Stone Art School. That's still all
Yes.
one word,
Yep,
right?
one long
yes,
tagline.
Exactly. Welcome, Scott.
Thank
We're
you very
glad
much. I appreciate it.
to have you here. This is exciting for me. I was on the board a couple of years, I think, running, and if you have not been to the Granite Museum, you've got to go. It's got a grand opening scheduled
May 18th.
May 18th.
Yep, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Yes, and by the
it's a
time
Saturday.
Scott has finished chatting about what he has done, just almost single-handedly down there, you will be beyond impressed. And you have to go. We'll go to Wayside for lunch and go to the Granite Museum.
I have been to Wayside, to be fair.
Oh, did you?
I have been to Wayside.
Oh, okay,
yes.
good. Great.
I'm happy to go again.
Oh, yes, no, all right. Good. So anyway, Scott, we always ask everybody to talk about themselves and
Sure.
why you decided to take the job.
Sure. Well, born and raised in Vermont and fell in love with museums at a very young age. I was fortunate that my parents took me to all these little local historical societies and the larger institutions as well. And when I got into college, I realized I wanted to explore history. And so at UVM, which I started working at when I was in high school, I was able to do archaeology for the consulting archaeology program. Then later on, worked for the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum and also assisted the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation and developing a couple of museums in the state.
You said that so casually, developing a couple of museums for the state.
Well,
just a couple.
Just a couple.
Well, it was always working with someone else.
Right.
So with the state, I worked with Audrey Porsche and helped to develop the Chimney Point State Historic Site.
Oh, great.
And then the Mount Independence Visitor Center.
Nice.
So that was my honors thesis at UVM and my master's thesis at Texas A&M.
Wow.
And then for the dissertation, working for the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, I focused on the canal boats on Lake Champlain and helped to build the full-scale replica of the Lois McClure.
Wow.
That's a pretty cool history right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a lot of fun.
They were just talking, Scott was just talking about the maritime. We really should do a show on that. That is an unsung place to go. I mean, we just came upon it, Bruce and I, totally accidentally while we were driving around. It's incredible.
It's a beautiful
It's unbelievable,
campus
yeah.
and just amazing history that we have here in the Champlain
I
Valley.
think we should take the video camera down with us, and
Yeah.
I'm going to do
It's
that.
I mean, it's a big part of our history in
Yes,
Vermont. I think
absolutely.
you probably know better than anyone, but I think Burlington was the third largest lumber port in the world at one point, something like that.
Really?
Yeah, and if you walk the bike path on the waterfront, you can see where some of the old piers used to be.
No kidding.
And they go literally from like Oak Ledge all the way to North Beach almost.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So how did you get to be the executive director?
So I had been in touch with the board of the Vermont Granite Museum since 2009. We actually shared an intern. I was working as the executive director for the Noyes House Museum in Morrisville. And our intern kept going back and forth, and I was answering questions of the board at the Granite Museum. And then in 2013, the board contacted me and asked if I'd come and help them throughout the season of 2014 to figure out a strategy of how to turn the institution into a real museum. They had struggled since about 2010, and they thought they needed an outsider to give them some perspective. So in 2014, I was a consultant, and I came up with a plan and provided it to the board. And then the board turned around and said, well, hey, if you're interested, we'd love it if you'd become the executive director and see through your plan. My plan was pared down a great deal from the original that was designed in 1998 to 2000, when money flowed a little bit easier from both state and federal funds. I've been working hard with a core of volunteers, numbering between 35 and 55 annually, plus my board, in order to turn it into a museum. And we've achieved quite a bit over the last
I think it's
5
amazing,
years.
absolutely amazing. And I must say the board members have done a lot of it themselves, and your dad should probably be given Dad's in there hammering and away
definitely.
and making.
He was there earlier this spring.
Was he?
Yeah, my father was a building contractor
Yeah.
for over 40 years, and I grew up helping him out. And
So now it's his turn, huh?
it made it much easier for me to get involved in this particular project because a lot of it dealt with developing infrastructure.
Right.
The Granite Museum is in an old granite shed, 300 feet long, 27,000 square feet, and roughly 2/3 of the building was just empty.
Right.
Dirt floor, nothing in it. And so it involved having to come up with putting infrastructure in that
Right.
building. Couldn't again follow the original plans of 2000 because that involved rebuilding shed number 3, which is attached to the standing
Right.
structure that's there today. So kind of compacted the design work that was done in 2000 into a
Right.
much smaller space.
Great. We should take
Pretty cool.
Matt Spencer's going to go over and take pictures for us so we can show at the end of this video.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
And granite is such a large part of Vermont's history as an export product.
Right.
It wasn't the first export product, though.
No, certainly potash would be one of those, and wheat. And logs that were transported on Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain, for much of the 18th and 19th century, was the highway number 1 for the region, and number 2 would be the Connecticut River.
Yeah.
And so it's whatever the farmers that were clearing their land could take off that property and either put it into a float, raft it down rivers to larger bodies of water, or put it in a cask and send it to market. That was the way to do it. And so originally, for those in the Champlain Valley, their market was Montreal and Quebec City, and those in the Connecticut River Valley, it was the lower Connecticut River. So those communities provided both the finished goods that were coming back to our region, and our exported raw goods went to them in order to turn into something that may have been sold throughout New England or even in Europe.
And slate was also an early export from
Yeah.
down in the Rutland area,
Yeah,
too.
and so when it comes to mineral resources, you've got iron ore that was in the throughout Vermont that was turned mostly bog ore that was turned into pig iron and then could be turned into by a blacksmith, all kinds of products that could be used locally. When we think about slate, it's one of the earliest headstone types, and as soon as the Champlain Canal opens up in 1823, the slate market just skyrockets. It allows for those in the Castleton, Rutland area, all the way to Granville, New York, to take and create roofing slates, headstones, and ship those to the bigger market, which is in the lower Hudson Valley, New York City, New Jersey shore.
So could you talk a little bit about how the Vermont Granite Museum was founded back in 1994?
Sure. So the Granite Museum is a community institution, and it comes about because of the community's interest. In 1994, there was a meeting at the Barre Opera House. About 300 individuals were in attendance, most of them seniors, but also a lot of people that were just interested in seeing Barre grow. They were trying to figure out the solution to a number of different problems that are recognized. One was the downtown area was fairly depressed. The granite industry had experienced a lot of consolidation during the 1980s, and by the time you get to 1994, there were a lot of storefronts that were empty. There were also a lot of apartments that were in the downtown area, which are also empty. And so how do you revive a community that's been so dependent upon one form of funding the granite industry? And so they thought, tourism might be a way to do it. And then another problem that was recognized by that group was the fact that there was lack of social cohesion in the community. Most of these people grew up came to age in the 1940s and 50s, and they were part of the first wave of immigrants, the first born from the wave of immigrants that came from 1880 to 1930. And so there was ethnic organizations like the Italian Pleasure Club, the Swedish Pleasure Club. Then there was also the organizations like the Canadian Club and others. And every weekend there was something to do. They'd go to various events and festivals, and they'd be competitions, whether it be bocce games or bolopama, or it could be a baseball game or a horseshoe tournament. And that was disappearing. That cohesion that they experienced in their youth was gone. There were a lot of people that moved into the community that didn't know much about the granite industry or didn't work in it because the population that was involved in the granite industry had greatly downsized from the thousands down into the hundreds. And so how do they make that cohesion occur once again? Well, maybe a cultural heritage institution. And then another thing that was recognized was the fact that a lot of the youth in the community didn't know a lot about the granite industry.
Right.
Their parents, their grandparents, they may not have worked in the industry, or they may be newcomers to the community. So I thought, well, again, we can provide a space where the kids can be educated about the importance of granite to the development of Barre as a community. And all of it just kept circling around the same conclusion, and that's that there needed to be a heritage center. There needed to be a place where people could have weddings and even funerals and celebrations of both the heritage of their community, but also maybe personal ones. And there's the Barre Opera House, there's the Labor Hall, there's the auditorium space, so spaces that had been used.
Club somewhere
and
in there.
Mutah and other organizations that had spaces, but there needed to be something different than those, something that was in a sort of modest size. And so that's how the Granite Industry, or Granite Museum was
I didn't know
born.
half of that. That's excellent.
And
So when did they buy, when did you come on board? What shape was the Jones Brothers?
Sure.
Because that building was the Jones Brothers
Granite Shed.
Granite Shed. And I mean, I remember they lifted it up,
Right.
and this is
So
a major project.
They purchased the building in 1998, and they spent the first 2 years just fundraising,
Right.
trying to pay for the building, and then the repairs that were necessary were a pretty long list. As you mentioned, it had to be raised,
Right.
new foundation put underneath it, and there had to be landscaping to the grounds. The original structure was below the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain, so there was no way that the federal or state government would
Right.
invest by giving out loans or grants
Right.
to something that was going to be destroyed potentially by a
Right.
flood. So that had to be raised, and it was picked up 3.5 feet. Not a lot, but enough. And re-landscaping of the property as well to accommodate its new use.
Right.
As a granite plant, originally it had no parking.
Yep.
And guys walked to work or they rode the train. Building was constructed in 1895, and so much of the labor force lived right in the surrounding
So
area.
was that underway when you came, or did you come
No,
much
that
after?
was
You came
that
much
was long,
after that.
long
Okay.
over.
Yeah.
So 2003, they'd completed much of the stabilization of the building,
Right.
and 1/3 of the structure was devoted to the Stone Art School.
Yeah. And we're gonna talk about that because there's some exciting news about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
But-
so my job was to turn the other 2/3 of the building into a museum.
Right.
And the first thing that was recognized is that you can't have a museum with a dirt floor.
Right.
It's really difficult to bring in guests to a space that is also below the foundation level and turns muddy in the spring and early summer.
Right.
So filling that in, pouring a concrete floor, and then acquiring collections. So much of the first few years was all about acquiring content
Right.
to be displayed within the museum. And I'm fortunate that a lot of the volunteers at the museum are connected to the granite industry.
It's the who's who of the granite industry.
Exactly.
Sure it
It's,
is.
it's very helpful to have
Yeah,
that.
they're wonderful.
And that's been really important to be able to collect the appropriate content, the things that were really strategically significant to the development of the granite industry, as opposed to a one-off item that just really never took off.
That's great.
So,
That's,
I have seen a museum with a dirt floor.
yes, I mean there are some, but it just
If it's
when it's a 27,000 square foot building with a large component that's dirt, it's really hard to.
Yeah.
I was
deal
going to say, I
with,
was
so.
there one night for a band. They had a dance. It was tough. It was a dirt floor, and that was, it was sort of like a hold-on deal.
that's really difficult if you're doing a dance.
Yes, we were
The
dancing.
floor
and-
is dirt. That's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, that was bad. So I read where you go around the state, and you were just talking about it a little bit before, to talk about the museum and
Sure.
the history. What do people take from, I mean, they must be excited to hear you talk.
Well, one thing that's great to be able to share the story throughout the state
Right.
is I'm able to take and demonstrate that it's much more complex than what most of the secondary sources portray the granite industry as.
Right.
Now, most of them focus on Barre, and Barre is the most important to Vermont's granite industry's history. But there are other communities all along, not just the eastern side of the state where granite is found, but even on the western side of the state. And there's granite quarries that are dotting all along the eastern side, and so it doesn't take much. You get to the late colonial era. They're moving into what we call Vermont today in the 1760s, and the first thing they want to do is they want to establish a farmstead. They want to grow grain, and if you want to eat your grain, then you grind it into a flour.
Right.
And so they establish grist mills, and those grist mills are dependent upon millstone that's made out of granite. And so wherever they can find it, they develop a quarry and operating systems to support those. It wouldn't be until the early 19th century that you have commercial quarries that are working much of the year, and they have individuals that have switched from being part-time quarrymen and full-time farmer to the flip, where you're full-time quarryman and you're part-time farmer.
Huh.
They don't abandon farming until the late 19th century.
Right.
So I've got the history of many of these communities, little ones like Kirby, and even Derby and Newport and Brattleboro and this smattering, Dummerston, all along the eastern side of the state. And so I'm able to show it's
That's
pretty
great.
diverse in terms of communities, but it's also diverse in terms of its ethnicity.
Yeah.
We've got some beautiful monuments in Barre that commemorate the Italian Americans, energy and support that went into the granite industry's development, but you also have the Scots at the other end of Barre City.
Right.
But what about the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Finns, the Spanish, the Greeks, the Turks, the Poles, the Germans, the French? They're all here. Many of them were part of the untrained that came to work in Barre because there was plenty of work to be had in the quarries and sheds. But there was also a select group that consisted of those that were very well educated and went through art schools in Europe, and in many cases they had experience working in marble primarily,
Right.
but that translated fairly well to working in granite. And they took the industry from making simple headstones and architectural elements, curbing stones and paving stones, to a level of high art. Which we can see in our cemeteries all throughout North America.
Now, isn't the rose that we do, that's very unique to
Barre
us.
rose.
And it's got a patent on it, how the rose fits into the granite like a lock and key, and that's
So
has
Alfio
a pat-
Brissetti
right.
is the one who patented the whole process by which you carve a rose through sandblast process. And he developed it starting after he came back after World War II. He had worked in his father's shed before the war, and he realized that the process could be improved upon. And so he just kept playing around during the late 1940s, then eventually got a patent on the entire process.
That's great.
And that process has been modified again over time as new products and machinery comes available. But he was constantly tinkering with the ideas, and he was also an educator and taught a large number of people in Vermont how to sandblast delicate features like roses and other flowers that could be incorporated into a monument. And that was a process that was ultimately cheaper than hiring a sculptor to carve something in
Oh,
granite
really?
as well.
You know,
So-
it's like a 3D rose, and it's got petals, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's the Barre rose.
The Barre rose.
I hadn't heard it called that.
Well, I think it's interesting because you look at some of the cemeteries in this area, and they themselves, in some ways, are a museum. You walk through and you look at some of the carvings on the headstones, and they're incredible.
Some of the greatest cemeteries right here in central Vermont would be Green Mountain, Montpelier,
Right.
located right next to all the granite sheds in the Montpelier area. And some of them are still standing and been repurposed today, right along the Winooski River. And then I would go to Hope Cemetery in Barre. Since the 1890s, it served as a showcase for the granite industry. The city of Barre recognized that They needed a place to not only commemorate their dead, but they needed to do it in a way that paid homage to the sacrifices that those individuals made to working in the industry. So all the headstones in there are made out of Barre gray, and in many cases they were either made by the individual who it commemorates, or made by their friends and relatives. There's a lot of intention in terms of the designs that they made for the cemetery, and they're reflective of the highest quality that the industry produced throughout the 20th century.
For somebody's funeral, I sat next to Mr. Parnagoni, is that how you pronounce it? And he was telling me about the cello
Yeah.
and how long it took them to make the strings, because you can put your, this is of granite, you can put your fingers around the string, and it took them like 2 years or something.
It's very delicate work in some of those
unbelievable.
pieces.
I don't even know if I ate. I was just sitting there like a deer in headlight listening to him. I was fascinated. He was
pretty
such a kind
impressive.
man. Yeah, great.
So you use, we mentioned earlier, you use volunteers a lot
Yes.
around the museum. You know, and hopefully one of the goals in doing this show is that people at home may feel compelled to help out with some of the things that you do. One of which is the internship program. You can talk a little bit about some of the different projects that volunteers and interns work on.
And as I mentioned earlier, we rely heavily upon volunteers. I'm currently the only paid employee. This year we're going to offer a little bit of money for some interns, but traditionally I've relied 100% on volunteer support in doing everything that any business does, whether it's marketing or it's dealing with collections management. And you can just relabel some of these things to work towards job experience that would be beneficial for you in the for-profit world. Instead of collections management, it's inventory of whatever you have, and we're constantly working to improve our ability to broadcast information through social media, but also getting information back from the public. So we're dealing with visitor experiences, customer experiences, if you label it differently, and so using surveys, processing that information. We also do event planning. We have usually somewhere between 12 and 18 events that are not ours at the museum annually. We host nonprofit organizations for their fundraisers. We've had 2 weddings every year since 2015, and it's a unique space for someone like that. It's interested in an industrial facility. It is an industrial cathedral in terms of its structure. We have also other birthday parties and other personal events.
Political debates.
Political debates.
I had Phil Scott and Bruce Listman debating on the stage in the thing. That was a great day. I know that was great.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
And Lost Nation Theater, Kim Bent and Kathleen Keenan. Kim wrote a story about the granite industry called Stone. It was a musical, and they performed it. I was crying the whole time because here you are on the stage performing Stone about the granite industry in the Granite Museum. I just thought that was so amazing when they're and Cordy, who is one of the main featured statues on Hope Cemetery, he was the sort of the lead in the play about Mr. Cordy, and you know, when you see him in Hope Cemetery, it's just amazing. I envy you your job.
And we're
it's a great
partnering
place
with
to work.
other theater companies. The Vermont Youth Theater is going to be doing a play this spring, and to hope it becomes an annual thing for them.
Great.
They've done a lot of practicing on our stage, and it gives them an opportunity to be around the public and get some press as well.
Well,
so.
I think you should also talk about the land, which is spectacular. And we realized one time at the board meeting that this is the gateway to Barre.
It is.
That's the first thing when they cross the line is the museum's land. Tell us a little bit about certainly the train and the statue there and the welcoming, and then what else you're going to do for the land.
So we're fortunate that the Granite Museum is positioned on the edge of the community because we have 12.5 acres of land that we can use. And currently we have a grass mown path 3/4 of a mile long for people to walk on. And within our 12.5 acres of land, we have 5 micro eco zones. So little wetlands and little tiny cedar forest. And then we've got the open field, and then you've got the riparian zone along the Stevens branch of the Niski River. And so each of those offers different types of habitats. And then we also have the archaeological remains of the Jones Brothers complex. Used to be 3 buildings on the site, main buildings, and there's only 1 today. You can see the foundations of one of the other 2. And then on the opposite side of the property, there's the old Wells Lamston granite plant. And that was there from the late 1870s, early 1880s, through to about 1923-24. And so you can walk around and see all this waste material, waste granite. You can see foundations. And so it's a great space to be able to meander around. And we're hoping to turn that 3/4 mile trail into a packed gravel trail so that people can walk on it, bike on it. And just this spring, I got 3 pedal cars.
Oh, good for you. There
So
you
those
go.
will be fun.
Yeah.
And that gives us an opportunity to get people out onto the landscape, have some fun, and learn a little bit about history. And the hope is that we'll be able to put in some outdoor signage so people can learn a little bit about what they're looking at, whether it be the natural features or the cultural features that are out there.
And you have the train with the track going?
Yes,
That's cool.
so we've got diesel locomotive number 14 on the museum property on a set of tracks. And
I was so mad. I was in Maine that day, but I watched it. They had a live,
live
they had
feed.
it live feed, so I was watching it on my computer.
Yeah.
Watching them
Oh,
move
did
it.
they
Moved it
moved
from
it?
Barre
Yep.
downtown to the museum, and I was part of the getting the permission. Oh my God, you had to you had to get permission from just about everybody
Right.
to move this
Yeah.
thing, but it went along smoothly. Thank you.
So this
Yeah.
was is this a vintage?
Yeah, so number 14 was a locomotive pulling granite blocks from the quarries, now where Rock of Ages is located, and down into Barre and Berlin, Montpelier, to the various granite sheds. And then when the blocks were finished off into final monuments or whatever it was turned into, then the locomotive would pull it to the railroad station where the head is and Montpelier, and then to be picked up by larger trains. So it's not a big locomotive, but it was the appropriate size for moving things around within Barre City. In an era when tractor trailers weren't yet the most popular means of transportation, at least at the local level.
Well, even now, like you see so like tractor trailer pulling a block of granite, and it's like one tractor trailer with like what you would think is a small block
Well,
of granite.
Because it's thousands of pounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
At 167 pounds per cubic foot, it doesn't take much to weigh up very quickly.
Yeah.
Surprised the thing doesn't go like this, right?
Yeah,
Some of them-
exactly.
Yeah. What did you say? 100 and
67 pounds per cubic foot.
jeez.
Yeah.
So that's
Don't let that drop on there.
exactly.
No.
Yeah, it gets heavy pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
it
then
does.
you have the
Yeah, so the path we hope to turn into a sculpture park.
right. Oh, this is cool.
And so the first element of that sculpture park is the Granite Museum sign,
Right.
right up near the Barre Montpelier Road. And that was designed by Chris Miller. And being a sign, we couldn't do a full sculpture of a body, sculpting a block of stone, in this case a millstone. Instead, we went with just a truncated version, so it shows the arms of the
Muscle.
sculptor with his hammer and chisel working his millstone, and it's a smaller version of it. Because of our signage laws in the state of Vermont, it had to fall inside those parameters, and
But that's
we
very
maximize the
effective
sign.
there. Because I
is.
know before
Catches the eye.
you had the signs pretty down, but so
Right.
as you're passing it, you're going, oh, wait, that's the,
What is that?
What is that?
Yeah.
And this one
Yeah.
is right smack in your face,
And
which is good.
we're hoping to have it, somewhere between a dozen and maybe 24 sculptures on the entire property. And so as you look down now at the museum today, you'll see there's the train with a great big block on the flat car that
Right.
has sandblasted in it, Vermont Granite Museum. And then we'll soon start to see some additional sculptures coming in the next few
And
years.
they're all movable so that can be
Correct.
changed. So
Right.
Yeah.
if you walk this week and a month from now, it may all be different.
Right. The hope
is
is
cool.
that we use as a showcase for the sculptors that are active in the industry.
Oh, cool.
And we have the tools and the abilities to be able to move these pieces around as they sell them, and we move in a new piece
Right.
as it's being created. I want to give an opportunity to sort of broadcast the quality and importance to those that are working in granite
Right.
today in the state of Vermont.
Well, and some of the artists are there on site working. They have
Correct.
little cubicles where that you can go in if you're lucky and they're there. You can just hang around and watch them. It's
They
really
can
cool.
use studio space, right?
Yes,
Right.
right.
Yeah. And so we have what are called bankers, those individual spaces, enough to accommodate 4 sculptors that are working, or 8 students. Typically a sculptor is doing a lot more, so we put the dust collection system, the heads, they look like big vacuum cleaners, right next to their workspace. And we've been fortunate that we've had several sculptors working over the last few years.
Right.
And last year was Chris Miller working on the statue that's on top of the State House Dome. It's not made out of stone. It's in fact made out of wood, but it's the same exact techniques of creating a model, scaling it up, and then carving that you would work in stone or any other medium. And for all of the sculptors that have been professionally trained, they work in softer materials first, and then work towards harder materials.
Right,
So
because softer is a little more forgiving.
yeah, and you can make mistakes, and you can manipulate things, and you can make a lot of them. Where if you're working in a very hard material like granite, yeah, you're investing a lot of energy and time in something that it's difficult to start over. So
Right.
work in something soft like marble, get all of your basic skills down, and then start transitioning into the harder material. And so it's a great opportunity to teach people about what it means to be a sculptor. All of them have worked in wood to some degree. It just happens that Chris Miller has worked 2 parallel lives, one in wood and one in stone, as a sculptor throughout his entire career.
That must have been exciting having her there.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet you must have gotten people from all over just to come in to see her.
So last year we had about 6,000 people that came into the museum, paying
Yeah.
customers, and then another 3,000 that came in just to see, agriculture being
Right,
carved
Right.
at the
Oh,
museum.
that's
So,
incredible. That's cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And pardon my ignorance, but was most of the granite that was produced in Barre in Vermont, was that mostly used for sculptures, or is that used in as construction granite?
That's a good question. There's differing qualities of granite throughout the state of Vermont. A sculptor wants to work with a very fine grained material and one where the crystals are all aligned. So granite is formed deep within the earth, someplace between 15 and 25 miles below the Earth's surface. It cools very slowly. It's made up of largely quartz and feldspar crystals. And the faster that stuff cools, the smaller the crystals. If it cools over a long period, the bigger they get. And if there's any twisting or change in that ball of granite, the pressure of the crust pushing against it, it can realign those crystals and turn them into just a nasty network that's really hard to work. Well, Barre Gray is one where we do have the fine crystals. It's all aligned. It's high quality in terms of the matrix within it. It's consistent all throughout in terms of its color, so you don't have any like white areas where it's just quartz. And this is nice and consistent gray all throughout it. But other granites throughout Vermont, Woodbury is a quarry that's currently active, is a great material for architectural elements. It's got a little bit larger crystal structures. It's still aligned, but it makes it stronger. It's got a tensile strength that makes it just a little bit better than Barre Gray for architectural pieces.
Which would be what, Scott? I'm sorry.
Things like lintels over doorways and
Oh,
windows. It might be some of the facing that goes around the foundation materials.
Right, okay.
It's all the accent elements, or it might be the tiles that go on the outside of a skyscraper. Bethel is another area. We have 3 regions where we've got quarries that are currently active, and Bethel's got a white granite. It's often called the white American granite. and its crystal structure is larger than Barre gray, and it's a great material for putting on the outside of skyscrapers. And there's ones in the Middle East that are completely clad in Bethel white. And so each one has just those slight variations in qualities and characteristics, and so they've taken opportunity to choose just the right one for different purposes. And the quarries that were found to be slightly inferior, maybe it had some iron that was soluble in it, which means it would rust on the surface after it got exposed to the environment. Obviously, you don't want that,
Right.
so that's something that would eventually be abandoned. And it takes time to figure that out. The
Right.
solubility may be, it takes 10, 15 years before it starts to streak rust. So,
Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's a great-
Rock of Ages has a place where you can go and watch them in their main building. There's a walkway, and you look down on the floor where they're sculpting, and they're with cranes. Well, you've got a crane in the museum
Yep.
where they come down and pick up these 1,000-pound, that's probably a small one, and they move them right over your head as you're working and praying that nothing will happen. It's fascinating to go there. It
yeah,
is.
Rock of Ages, you can go in and see the active granite plant.
Right.
And you can also take and go up to the visitors platform
Yep.
up at the quarry site and see
That's
them
great.
working in the quarry there as well. And it's a very different place than it was just even 25 years ago.
Yeah.
The quarries in the state of Vermont, they've worked towards trying to turn them into drive-in quarries, which is safer. You don't have blocks being picked over your head and taken
Right.
out of the quarry by large derricks. Instead, you're simply driving in with a large forklift and picking the piece out and driving it out. And you're using other heavy machinery in order to move around waste material, bucket loaders, and big draughts. And so, in years past, you'd have much smaller pieces of machinery, or things would be done by hand. And so, in the 19th century, you'd have hundreds of men working in one quarry, and today in that same quarry, you might have 5.
Oh, wow.
So it's dramatically reduced thanks to new technologies. And the quarrying process itself has been just dramatically changed with the use of wire saws in the quarry itself. So instead of using jackhammers to drill holes at close intervals and blasting out the material in between, either through the jackhammer or through small charges of black powder, today it's a matter of drilling just a couple of holes, threading a diamond wire through it, which is a wire that has, it looks like beads on it, and each of those beads is encrusted by diamonds. And the diamonds are able to slice right through the granite,
Nice.
and any of the material that's been cut is washed out through water.
Right. A lot of water.
A lot of water. yeah.
I took a tour of Rock of Ages one time, and they have these huge circular blades. I mean, they're bigger than this room, and just gallons and gallons of water being poured over it. It's all recycled, but because you have to keep it from getting too hot, I presume.
Exactly.
Or fire, I don't know
Yep.
what, but it's just amazing. The noise alone is just deafening.
And,
So exciting.
And the noise itself has also been reduced through technology. So those
Wow.
original saw blades were incredibly noisy,
Oh, I bet.
and they brought the decibels down just through the engineering of the saw blade itself. So to make a workplace environment a little bit more conducive to
But
working
there's not many people, I don't think, going into, that's a big concern.
No.
I'm trying to remember
It
who's
is.
the, in the Granite Association. He was always talking about that. I think he's on your board too, but anyway, they were just worried about people wanting to go in, wanting to learn this skill
Right.
and this trade.
So currently there's about 350 members of the Granite Cutters Union.
Yeah.
These are the folks that have direct contact with the granite. And if you're using a piece of machinery like the big forklifts up at the quarries, or you're working on forklifts or overhead cranes in the sheds, then you're part of the steel union. And there's roughly about 100 members of the steel union. So right now we've got 450 people that are working either in the quarries or on the shop floors. And then you've got maybe another 150 that are working in offices.
They're not getting
and-
any younger though, are they?
No, they're not. The average age is now in the mid-50s
Right.
for the granite industry that are part of the unions. And every year that passes, those people get closer and closer to retirement age.
Right.
And it's very difficult to try to coerce people into the granite industry because in many cases they don't know much about it.
Right.
Most of the granite sheds are on the back streets in Barre. And so you don't drive by them and see help wanted ads
Right.
or see them actually working because they're inside a building. That's a big warehouse.
So this may be a good time to talk about the Stone Art School, because
Yeah.
that's exciting.
So when the Granite Museum was founded, it was recognized right away that with the closure of the Stone Arts program at Spalding High School in Barre, there needed to be a replacement for that. It closed in '97 at the high school. The museum started in 1998 kind of formalizing what it wanted to do as an institution, and so they devoted a third of the structure to teaching the next generation of sculptors and designers. They did pretty well for a while by, first of all, recruiting the instructor that ran the program at Spalding High School. But unfortunately, when he passed away, there went all the momentum, and they kind of lost their direction for the Stone Arts program. And my job, I recognized initially, was to create a museum. And now that the museum is, I call it my rough draft phase, I'm now moving towards trying to get the Stone Arts program up and running. And we've been trying to create a relationship with an institution of higher education, preferably here in the state of Vermont, and we're working towards that goal. And if all things go well, we'll be able to start training students potentially as early as the fall of 2020.
Isn't that great? That's really great.
And it's got to be done as quickly as possible because many of our sculptors are now in their 50s and 60s, and they're poised to retire.
Right.
And what I'd like to do is recruit them before they move away
Right.
to Florida or Arizona or
Right.
wherever they go to retire, to try to get into the Stone Art School and start beginning to share the knowledge that they've gained.
That's a good transition for them at their age. You can't be climbing those walls
No.
every other day, so this would be great to pass it on.
And they've got a lifetime of information to
Right.
share with the next generation. And they also were the ones trained by those that had the formal art training in Europe. Many of them were fortunate to work with the old Italian and French and Spanish and
Right.
Greek and Turk sculptors, and their information that they were able to impart on the modern sculptors in Barre goes back literally 1,000
Right.
years. Those stone programs have been around since the medieval period in many cases.
If all goes well, maybe by the end of the year, you'll be,
So I should
Talking.
hopefully by the end of this year have
That's
hopefully some good news and
Excellent.
say that we're about ready to open our doors as an institution that provides a bachelor's of fine arts
Great.
and focusing in the stone arts. And our program is also going to not only have a track for those that are sculpting in the traditional sense of starting with a raw block and going at it with hammer and chisel and pneumatic hammers and diamond saws, but we also will have a track for those that are interested in dry laid stone.
What was
Another
that? What'd you
dry
say?
laid stone.
Dry
So
laid.
everybody, when you think about dry laid stone, you think about stone walls, which we have all throughout the state of Vermont. But there's also over the last probably 30 years or so, an interest in taking the dry laid stone concept and turning it into a form of art.
Like arches and stuff like that.
Oh.
Well, even beyond arches, actual sculptural work. All you need to do is go onto Google and type in dry laid stone sculpture, and you can see some amazing pieces.
I'm
Not
sorry
sure
to
who.
be clueless. What makes
So-
it dry? I
So there's
don't
no
vision
mortar.
anything.
There's no mortar. In our
Yeah.
typical stone walls, you see all throughout the state
Yeah,
of Vermont is
stuck
just
together with-
stone on top of stone.
Right.
And you'll notice that on the outside, at the bottom of the stone wall, it's wider than it is at the top. And so just gravity holds it in place.
Oh.
But it's well locked together as well through the placement of smaller stones that don't allow those
Oh.
rocks to shift.
Okay.
And if it was a poorly constructed wall, it's usually flat on the ground
Right.
and all spread out because it didn't have the small stones locking it together. And there's traditional techniques that go all the way back to ancient times
Cool.
in building stone walls. And those ideas were brought to North America during the colonial era, and they spread largely throughout the northern part of North America because lots of stone available, a lot of glacial till material dumped by glaciers across our landscape. And the
Right.
farmers are clearing it. Well, they use it for fencing material as well.
Huh, cool.
So one example that I just love that I found on the internet was a stone wall. It was this large curved stone wall, very tall, and what the sculptor had done is actually made a tree. It projects out from the stone wall. It's three-dimensional,
Oh my God.
and it's huge.
Oh, wow.
It was like 20 feet tall, and it's this just amazing tree made out of stone that just projects
Cool.
out. And there's no mortar, no iron pinning. It's just well-drained
weight.
soils
It's all the
behind
weight
it,
and
and it's the
balance.
sheer weight.
Huh,
Um,
sorry.
there's
no.
also just amazing pieces that you can find on St. Michael's College campus.
Some
There's
great pieces.
yeah, and there's another one that's in just before you get to Morrisville on Route 100. It's a great big corkscrew right in front of the sculptor's yard, and it's just dry laid stone that's put in there. Think
Is
about
that
all
like
of
when
our
you see, I know, because I don't know how this works, when you see all these stones, one on top of the other?
the
Is that the
cairns.
same sort of
Yeah, so you make
concept?
yep,
I
and
don't know
but you
how
can
they do that.
you can create all kinds of variations in
Yeah.
shape, and you can twist them.
Cool.
So we've got the great fortune that we have a lot of dry laid stone workers here in the state of Vermont that are members of the Stone Trust in Dummerston, Vermont, and we've got a partnership with the Granite Museum with the Stone Trust. We have hopefully a stone wall that they'll be building and
Great.
tearing down and rebuilding every single year as part of an instructional
Oh,
process. And then they'll also be building other features on the property that will be one-offs. So they'll build this amazing piece for us. It might be a beautiful stone wall that skirts right along the Stevens Branch that allows people to stand fairly close to the edge but not fall into the river.
Right.
And create niches for sculpture that might be carved in granite
Neat. Oh,
to put into
exciting.
those walls. So I think we've got a great group of potential instructors and partners that'll make this successful.
How many students could you think you could do at any
Well, we're
one
hoping to
time?
have about a dozen to 15
good.
students each semester working with an instructor.
Right.
We're limited on the number of students just because it is a very hands-on process, much like any art.
Right.
You can't have 75 students and actually
Right.
get
Little
much
safety
done.
problem.
And there's a safety issue, but
Right.
just the time and energy that an instructor needs to spend with a
Right.
student in order to make sure they understand the techniques and helps them to exceed at meeting their goals as a
Great.
student.
Wow. Cool.
So one thing I want to go back to is it sounds like the type of granite in Barre in the quarries here is pretty unique. Where else in the country or where else in the world is that type of granite found that's really conducive to sculptures?
So Barre is one granite center in North America. There are other centers, St. Cloud, Minnesota area, Cold Springs, Colorado, Alberton, Georgia, and each has granite that is used for monuments and sculptural work. There's also granites that are found globally that are currently purchased by North American and European sculptors and turned into finished monuments
And you
and
remember, I
sculptural
don't know if you
pieces.
remember all that mess with the Chinese being contracted to use their granite and a sculpture for Martin Luther King's
Memorial, yeah.
memorial in Washington. That was huge. I was very active in that, writing letters, picketing, trying to get them to realize that should at the very least be U.S. granite. If it's not Barre, then
Right.
somebody else. But I guess they make, the granite is so poor quality that we have to do a lot of repair work. So it's
Sure.
sort of there's light at the end of a bad tunnel or something.
Well, what happens is a lot of times, someone will purchase a monument that comes from either India or China, and it's not perfectly square. There's imperfections within it, and in some cases, those here in Vermont will use those. They'll square them up.
Right.
They'll make them perfect.
Right.
But it's the material that they really want. And also it's been by India and China this granite industry, they've taken it beyond the raw block stage to a near finished monument, and then it's completed here in the state of Vermont.
Ah.
And that can be done in other states throughout the U.S. as
Sure,
well.
right.
So there's a lot of purchasing of granite from overseas, and like the sandblast lettering of the person's name, age at birth and death, and all that, all the dates. Those are sandblasted in by someone in any state within the U.S. But when it comes to high quality pieces,
It's us.
it's
Barre.
us. It really is us.
Right.
And there's other material that's being made in the other granite centers in North America. And there's some high quality stuff being done in Canada as well. And the province of Ontario, there's some beautiful pieces being done
Right.
there.
That's great.
These are individuals that have been trained, in some cases, right here in Vermont. Or they're second generation. They've been
Right.
trained by someone who was trained in Vermont and who's gone elsewhere.
That's cool.
So.
We better ask about the Granite Association, or Doug's not going to talk to us.
We better.
Oh,
Go ahead.
well, the Granite Association, which was
Yeah.
in the Circle in Barre for a long,
Right.
long time, arranged to move in with you all in the
Yeah.
building, and
So it's been a
worked
couple
out
of years, and yes, it's terrific. It ensures that we've got clear communication going back and forth between the Barre Granite Association, which has represented the granite industry since the 1890s, and the museum. Now, we're there to showcase what the industry has done in the past in its history, and then also to look towards the future for the granite industry. And for those that are coming to Barre to work with our granite manufacturers, they're able to take and see why is it that Barre and the rest of Vermont has been one of the premier locations.
That's great. You can help each other with marketing.
Correct.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
Right.
Because they put out a very nice book every year.
The Barre Life.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
so that's annually, that's put out in the fall. And what it does is it provides kind of a place to tout, what has the
right,
granite
right.
industry done that year
Yeah.
in terms of high quality monuments, and also some articles in there to talk maybe about the historical aspects or those that have played an important role
What
within
did
the
they
industry.
do with their board table?
The boardroom table,
The boardroom
which
table,
is made
which-
out of granite
This
from
thing
the
is
VGA.
incredible. How big do you think that thing is?
So it seats about 12 people at the table comfortably,
Solid
with
granite.
overstuffed chairs. Yeah. So it's probably about 850, 900 pounds.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it will be going into the new conference room, which is currently under construction
Ah.
at the museum.
Excellent.
Thanks to the Barre Granite Association and its members, we're now going to have a beautiful conference room.
Oh, nice.
And it's available for rent for the public.
Perfect.
And it'll be a great location to also offer classes, or lectures,
Right.
small lectures.
That's the one thing I always remember when I first went into that table is it's this dark,
Dark berry
beautiful-
gray.
I mean, it's just incredible, this
Yeah.
thing. And I think the floor itself it's a good thing that's not
Yeah.
on the second floor.
Yeah.
I think you have to bolster it up a little bit. It's really heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And
Very
Doug
cool.
Grahn, who used to help us out on the show here when it first got started, he's their executive director.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool stuff.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left, but tell us about this opening party that you
Yeah.
are planning. We talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but
Sure.
kind of walk
So we
us
try to
through it.
bookend our season at the Vermont Granite Museum. We provide an opportunity for people to see what we've been working on over the winter. And my hope is that every year we kind of bring out a new sculptural piece that will either be on our sculptural park or is within the museum. And we'll be unveiling a piece that was done by Italian-American sculptor, Giuliano Ceccanelli,
Oh,
Sr.
for sure.
And it's called Repose. Giuliano did it in the 1980s, and it was purchased here locally, and went to Salt Lake, and then came back from Salt Lake when he moved back, and it is now at the museum.
Wow.
And so that will be one of the pieces that will go in our sculpture park, but we're still planning out where it's going to go as of yet. But we'll unveil that, and there'll be a dedication
That's
by the
great.
donor and his family. We call it the opening extravaganza. We allow the public to become part of the exhibit by getting them involved in sculpting, whether it's in PVC pipe, clay, cardboard, hard foam
Great.
or soft foam blocks. And then we've got kind of a new feature this year. I've been trying to get those people out onto the path to explore our property, so I have pedal cars.
Oh,
I have
you
3
said
of
that.
them.
That's hysterical. That's good.
And those
I
pedal
need
cars.
pictures of this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so the pedal cars are one way to sort of get people excited to get out there. And the cars are rated to hold a capacity of 350 pounds. So they're designed for adults, but you can also push the seat all the way forward, and an 8-year-old can pedal
That's
them
great.
as well.
And the land is right on the river, and some
Right.
spots there are just breathtaking.
In the
Yeah.
floodplain.
In the floodplain.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
don't worry about that.
some of the property is not in the floodplain; it's well above it, so it's just great views. And every year we've got ducks that are on the Stevens Branch. It's kind of a quiet spot
Yeah,
for
it's
them, so they're
beautiful.
zipping back and forth.
Right.
There are no houses back there, so it's a perfect location for them to have their young and then just cruise up and down the
Nice.
river.
It's
So.
beautiful. We only have
yeah.
2 minutes, and I forgot to ask you, there is another building on the premise, and you were
Yeah.
going to, I think, turn that into a blacksmith shop. Is that
So-
still progressing? Or?
So that little building was a blacksmith shop from 1910 to sometime
Right.
in the 1930s. Then it was a storage building. And originally the plan was to turn that into a blacksmith shop again by taking out the exhibit over at Swenson Granite plant
And bring it there. Right.
and moving it over to there. But instead what we decided is we need that as an office.
Oh,
It would
okay.
be a
Well,
great
that makes
office
sense.
for us at the museum, and then to put the blacksmith shop within the museum.
Good.
And it'll be right next to our working blacksmith shop. So you've got a static display showing what a
Right.
blacksmith shop would have looked like in the past, and then you get an active one that contains some features of both old and new.
Great.
So
Excellent
That's
idea.
always
Yeah.
my favorite exhibit. Any
blacksmith?
museum that I go to is the blacksmith shop because
Yeah.
it's so fast, and especially like the working ones where you get a show
When
at
they
a
hit it and it
museum
turns
or something,
bright
and
red.
you can go in and watch what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's very
That's
cool.
cool. Well, it's very exciting. So 1 minute and 20 seconds. What's ahead for the museum? You've mentioned so many different things, but
So
is there a plan of action?
there is a plan of action. So since there is just me as a paid employee at the moment, I need more bodies. I need more volunteers to participate either in our major events of the opening event for Open Extravaganza
And then
or
you
a
have the
closing
Granite
event,
Festival.
the Granite Festival
Right.
in the fall. And so I need assistance in those. They require quite a bit of preparation and individuals to provide guidance in different
Right.
stations as
Parking, I
visitors
did
come in.
parking one year.
Yep, parking is definitely a big one.
I would pay money to see
Yeah,
that.
oh yeah, that was great. Nobody paid attention. When I
Pat
saw it was
directing
me.
traffic.
And then we also just need assistance at a daily level. And skills are not necessary. We provide those skills. And we actually been working with the Department of Labor, providing skill sets, skill opportunities in building for those in reach-up programs and
Perfect, good for
and
you.
other programs like Vermont Associates and Washington County Mental Health. And so
Good for you.
that's been really helpful for me because I get people with a lot of different skill sets and also eager to learn.
Right.
And they're often there for months at a time.
Yep.
And
Wish I
then
remembered his name. When I did those little clips of volunteers, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a young man there who was an intern. He was so impressive.
Yeah.
I just can't remember his name, but I was blown away by his knowledge.
Uh-huh.
He really knew his stuff.
Well, it's great to see people grow,
Yeah, right.
and I'm pleased to see them go off and get jobs, get back out into the job market, but also sad at the same time. So,
Yeah, well, they
so-
get so involved.
yeah, so getting additional help from
So
the
you wanna
community. It is a
throw out
community
your,
museum.
a
To
website
contact
or-
us, you can contact me at director@vtgranitemuseum.org, or you can call us at the museum at 802-476-4605.
That's great. And you won't regret it. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.